Imagine a woman who can handle a live, venomous snake without even flinching.
Right?
Like she can walk through the most notoriously terrifying haunted house with just this completely bored expression on her face because her brain simply does not register external threats.
Yeah, she was just entirely fearless.
But then, and this is where it gets crazy, researchers have her take a single deep breath of air with a slightly altered chemical makeup, just a little bump in carbon dioxide.
Uh-huh.
And within seconds, she suffers a full-blown panic attack, like the very first one of her entire life.
It's incredible. The case of patient SM, which is how she's known in the medical literature, completely shattered how neuroscientists thought about the human brain.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because we used to think of our internal security system as, well, just a single mechanical alarm. A window opens, the sensor trips, the bell rings.
Right, a simple trigger.
Exactly. But her story proved that the body's alarm system is actually running on multiple independent tracks.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today in this deep dive. Welcome, everyone. We are looking at the body's ultimate ancient survival mechanism, anxiety.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And our mission here is to figure out what this alarm system actually is, how the medical definition has dramatically shape-shifted over time, and, when this incredibly vital, evolved mechanism crosses the line from keeping you alive to becoming a clinical disorder.
Which is such an important distinction for people to understand. To set a clinical baseline for you, it really helps to recognize that anxiety is never just one monolithic experience.
Okay, so it's not just feeling stressed.
No, not at all. It is a combination of three distinct layers firing simultaneously. First, you have the subjective layer.
Meaning like the mental part.
Right, the psychological weight of it, the unmistakable sense of dread, the obsessive worry, that terrible feeling that the ground is just about to drop out from under you.
Oh, yeah. I think we all know that feeling.
Right, then you have the physiological layer, which is the hardware reacting.
So sweating, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Exactly. Your heart starts racing, your breathing gets shallow, muscles tense up, and finally you have the behavioral layer.
What does that look like in practice?
This usually shows up as active avoidance. You skip the party, you don't send the difficult email, or you just have this restless, hypervigilant inability to sit still.
Well, what really stands out when you examine those three layers is how intensely physical the whole experience is. I mean, it completely takes over the body.
It really does. It's deeply physiological.
Which makes perfect sense when you look at the linguistic origins of the word. Because for most of human history, anxiety was felt in the body long before it was ever really understood in the mind.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. The word anxiety actually comes from the Latin root anger, which literally means to choke or strangle.
Wow.
I know, right? It shares the exact same root as the words anguish and angina. So early humans didn't conceptualize it as a mental state at all. They experienced it as a physical constriction of the throat and chest.
That makes total sense. Because before modern medicine really claimed jurisdiction over that feeling, it belonged primarily to philosophy, not science.
Right, the philosophers were the first to tackle it.
Exactly. In 1844, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote extensively about this concept of angst. But he explicitly did not frame it as a medical malfunction or, a disease to be cured.
So what did he call it?
He called it the dizziness of freedom.
The dizziness of freedom. I mean, that is just such a profound way to capture the human condition.
It really is beautiful. Kierkegaard argued that angst is essentially the vertigo a person feels when they're confronted with the vast possibility of their own choices.
Like standing on the edge of a cliff.
Exactly. If you stand on the edge of a cliff, you aren't just afraid of the wind blowing you off. You're anxious because you realize you actually have the freedom to jump.
Wow.
Yeah, for him, the alarm wasn't broken. It was simply the price of admission for being a self-aware creature capable of making decisions about the future.
I love that. That philosophical weight is a beautiful way to understand the human experience. But, and this is a big but a beautiful philosophy, doesn't give you much to work with if you're a clinician trying to treat someone who, say, literally cannot leave their house.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So to understand how we went from Kierkegaard's dizzying freedom to modern medical diagnoses, we have to look at the incredibly messy history of how psychiatry has struggled to pin this shape-shifting concept down.
Oh, it has been a moving target for over a century. It's fascinating.
Where does it start clinically?
Well, if you go back to the late 19th century, anxiety wasn't recognized as its own distinct medical issue at all. It was folded into this massive, vague, catch-all category called neurasthenia.
Neurasthenia.
Yeah, it was popularized by an American neurologist named George Beard. And it was basically just a blanket term for generic nervous exhaustion.
It honestly sounds like a lazy diagnosis for just being overwhelmed by the Industrial Revolution. Like, oh, you have neurasthenia, go take a nap.
That was essentially the prescription. I mean, it really was. It wasn't until 1894 that Sigmund Freud stepped in and actively carved anxiety out of that giant bucket.
Okay, so Freud enters the chat.
He does. He argued that this specific cluster of symptoms, the palpitations, the intense dread, the impending doom, deserved its own unique diagnostic identity.
Which is fair, but his explanation for it was a bit weird, right?
Very psychoanalytic. His initial mechanism for it was what he called dammed up libido.
Meaning repressed sexual energy that had nowhere to go, so it just magically converted itself into physical panic.
Right. That was the theory.
But when I was reading through the notes on Freud's timeline for this deep dive, the thing that absolutely blew my mind was the complete 180-degree turn he did later in his career.
Yeah, he totally changed his mind.
By 1926, in a paper he wrote, Freud completely abandoned the libido idea. He reversed his own theory and argued instead that anxiety was a signal generated by the ego to warn the mind of internal danger.
He realized the alarm wasn't just a byproduct of repressed energy. It had a distinct evolutionary purpose. It was a warning system.
Wait, so the very person who established the modern clinical concept of anxiety couldn't even make up his mind on what it actually was?
Pretty much. And that willingness to completely redraw the boundaries didn't stop with Freud. I mean, fast forward to 1980 with the publication of the DSM-3.
That's the primary diagnostic manual used by psychiatry, right?
Exactly. Before 1980, American psychiatry just used a broad label called anxiety neurosis for almost everything.
So whether you were having a sudden, terrifying panic attack in a grocery store, or you just had a low-level chronic worry about your finances for a decade, it all just went into the exact same file folder.
Right, until the pharmacology proved otherwise.
How so?
Well, a prominent researcher named Donald Klein, along with some others in the field, began observing how patients responded to different medications. And they discovered that sudden panic attacks responded to entirely different chemical treatments than chronic worry did.
Wow, okay. That is a crucial pivot point for you as a listener to catch. Because the chemical treatments work differently, they realized the underlying biological machinery driving those two experiences had to be fundamentally different.
Exactly, the conclusion the field reached. So the DSM-3 split that broad category into distinct, separate diagnoses, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, and panic disorder.
And then they've kept changing it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those goalposts moved again as recently as 2013 with the DSM-5.
What changed then?
For decades, post-traumatic stress disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder lived inside the anxiety disorders chapter. But in 2013, they were removed entirely.
The reasoning being that the trauma memory mechanism of PTSD and the compulsive ritual mechanisms of OCD were just too biologically and behaviorally distinct from ordinary anxiety to share the same category.
Right.
It just proves that this entire field of mental health is a living, revisable model. It's not a fixed fact of nature like, a broken femur.
We are constantly updating the map as we get better biological tools, which I think brings us to the core of the issue.
Yeah.
If the definition keeps changing based on our evolving understanding of biology, we really need to look under the hood. Like, what is the actual biological machinery driving this alarm system?
Well, from a first principles evolutionary standpoint, anxiety is an incredibly sophisticated early warning system.
It really is.
Think of it like a biological relay race where the baton is just a chemical signal. Deep in your temporal lobe is a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala.
The famous amygdala.
Right, and its whole job is to be the scout looking over the horizon, flagging any stimulus as a potential threat.
And once that scout sees a threat, the relay race begins. The amygdala fires a signal to the hypothalamus, which basically acts as the command center.
Okay.
The hypothalamus then activates your sympathetic nervous system. Think of that as the telegraph wires of your body and the HPA axis.
Which stands for the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, right?
Exactly. And this system acts as a chemical factory, immediately flooding your bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol.
So suddenly your muscles are flooded with oxygen, your breathing accelerates, and your heart rate spikes to pump blood faster. It's like your brain is a weather radar predicting a storm before it hits, so you have time to board up the windows and take shelter.
That's a perfect analogy.
From a survival standpoint, a brain that predicts danger and physically prepares for it survives much better in the wild than a brain that waits for a predator to actually bite before reacting.
Absolutely. And this biological reality directly challenges one of the biggest misconceptions about anxiety, the idea that it's just all in your head or, purely psychological.
It's so physical.
Very physical. In 1936, an endocrinologist named Hans C.I. conducted a series of landmark experiments that proved how deeply physiological this response is.
Right, Salai was the one who actually coined the term stress, didn't he?
He did. He coined stress and described what he called the general adaptation syndrome.
Celli was the one working with the laboratory rats. He exposed them to sustained, intense physical irritants, things like extreme cold environments or forced, prolonged exercise.
Right. And he found that regardless of what the specific external stressor was, if the animal's alarm system was mobilized and never allowed to turn off, the rats developed the exact same triad of severe physical damage.
What happened to them?
They developed enlarged adrenal glands from overworking the chemical factory, a shrunken thymus gland, which compromised their immune system, and literal bleeding stomach ulcers.
Wow, so this is a purely mechanical breakdown from a system running too hot for too long.
Exactly.
The rats weren't having psychological crises about their mortgages. It was just the generic physical toll of a sustained alarm response. The hardware takes real damage.
It does.
But the fascinating part is how the psychological software can be rewritten to trigger that hardware, which brings us to the infamous 1920 Little Albert experiment by John Watson and Rosalie Rayner.
Ah, yes. A major historical milestone in psychology, though ethically. Highly questionable today.
Oh, entirely unethical today. You could never do this now.
Never. So they took a 9-month-old infant, Albert, and introduced him to a harmless white laboratory rat. Initially, Albert showed no fear whatsoever.
Just a curious baby.
Right. But then, Watson and Rayner began classical conditioning. Every time they showed the baby the rat, they stepped behind him and violently struck a steel bar with a hammer, creating this terrifying, loud clang.
They basically hardwired a false alarm into a baby's brain.
They really did.
After just 7 pairings of the rat and the horrific noise, Albert began crying and frantically trying to crawl away at the mere sight of the rat alone, even when there was no noise.
And the fear even generalized. He became afraid of other fuzzy things, like a rabbit, a fur coat, and even a Santa Claus mask.
It's so sad, but it proved that the triggers for our anxiety response can be learned through association. You aren't just born with a static list of fears. Your brain updates its threat catalog based on your environment.
Exactly. And this discovery actually laid the foundational groundwork for modern exposure-based therapies, proving that if a fear can be learned, it can potentially be unlearned.
So little Albert proves that our alarms can be accidentally wired to go off at the wrong external triggers. But, going back to the start of our deep dive, is the amygdala the only way to trip the alarm?
That exact question is what makes the 2013 case study of patient SM so revolutionary.
Right, the woman with the snakes.
Yes, it completely upended the field. As we mentioned, SM had a rare genetic disease that had calcified and completely destroyed the amygdala on both sides of her brain.
So her external threat radar was just physically gone.
Gone. Researchers tried everything to scare her.
Well,
They took her to an exotic pet store with live snakes and massive spiders. They took her through a notoriously terrifying haunted house.
and nothing.
Nothing. She showed zero fear, zero hesitation. She was curious, not afraid.
But then, they gave her a mask that delivered a single breath of air enriched with 35% carbon dioxide, which, is a standard laboratory method used to safely simulate the feeling of suffocation and trigger panic.
Right.
And when SM inhaled that CO2, the physical sensation of air hunger hit her, and she had a massive, full-blown panic attack.
And that was the aha moment for neuroscientists worldwide. It proved unequivocally that anxiety and panic run on at least 2 different neural tracks.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the amygdala handles external, learned fear like a snake or a loud clang. But internal physiological panic, like the sensation of suffocating or a racing heart, is tracked by an entirely different pathway. It relies on brainstem circuits that monitor what we call interoception.
Interoception, that's basically the dashboard warning lights of your body, right?
It's a great way to put it.
It's how you know you're hungry or that your bladder is full or that your heart is beating too fast without having to look at an external monitor. It's your brain sensing your internal state.
Yes, exactly.
And proving that we have multiple panic buttons really shatters the idea that anxiety is just a simple psychological weakness.
Which is a lingering cultural stigma we still fight today. The idea that highly anxious people are just choosing to be overly sensitive.
Right.
If we recognize this as a multi-track biological alarm system, we have to ask about the biological roots of our temperament. Like, why are some alarms so much louder than others from day one?
And to understand that, we can look at the incredible longitudinal work of Harvard psychologist Jerome Kagan, starting back in the 1980s.
Yes, Kagan's work is foundational here.
Kagan didn't rely on asking adults about their childhoods. He brought 4-month-old infants into a laboratory and exposed them to completely mundane, novel stimuli.
Very simple things.
Yeah, a cotton swab with an unfamiliar mild smell, a colorful mobile moving above their crib, a tape recording of a new voice.
And he observed how their baseline nervous systems reacted to the novelty. He found that about 15 to 20% of these infants showed intense motor distress.
Like thrashing around.
Yeah, they cried, they arched their backs, they thrashed their limbs vigorously.
Yeah.
Kagan categorized this biological temperament as high reactive.
Okay.
And because this study tracked these exact same individuals for decades, he followed these kids into adolescence and adulthood.
And what he found is that the infants who were high reactive at 4 months old, long before any complex trauma or parenting styles could take root, were significantly more likely to develop social anxiety and behavioral inhibition as adults compared to their calm, low-reactive peers.
Right. The sensitivity of the alarm system's hardware is observable in infancy. It established a measurable biological temperamental route to anxiety proneness.
So your baseline sensitivity is something you were just born with.
It is.
However, I think the crucial takeaway for you listening is the caveat to Kagan's work. Vulnerability isn't destiny.
Absolutely not.
Not every single high-reactive infant developed a clinical disorder. Your biology hands you the hardware, but your environment, your life experiences, and your coping mechanisms provide the software programming that determines whether that alarm system ever crosses the line into a medical issue.
That distinction right there sits at the center of one of the most intense ongoing debates in psychiatry today, the medicalization of normal life stress.
Right, because where is the line?
Exactly. Some of the original architects of the DSM-3 have publicly warned that if we lower diagnostic thresholds too much, we risk taking a normal, highly adaptive response to the very real uncertainties of life and improperly labeling it a disease.
And when you label a normal human emotion a disease, society's immediate instinct is to try and cure it with a pill.
Always.
The problem with trying to forcibly shut off an evolutionary alarm system is perfectly illustrated by the pharmaceutical boom of the 1950s through the 1970s.
Not the tranquilizer era.
Yeah. Drugs like meprobamate, which was branded as Miltown, and later benzodiazepines like Valium, were aggressively marketed as absolute cures for everyday anxiety.
And the marketing was so successful that by the 1970s, Valium was the best-selling prescription drug in America.
It became a massive cultural phenomenon. It was famously dubbed Mother's Little Helper, even getting its own dedicated song by the Rolling Stones in 1966.
Right.
But the problem with Mother's Little Helper was that it didn't just target irrational panic, it chemically muted all emotional arousal.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. While benzodiazepines are highly effective for acute short-term crisis intervention, trying to chronically suppress the nervous system carries massive risks of tolerance, severe physical dependence, and brutal withdrawal seizures.
You simply cannot drug away the human condition without consequences. Modern neuroscience, particularly the work championed by Joseph Ledoux, really helps clarify why this is so difficult.
What does Ledoux say?
Ledoux emphasizes a strict distinction between fear and anxiety. The dominant view today defines fear as your immediate response to a present identifiable threat.
So a dog is lunging at you right now. That's fear.
Exactly, that's fear. Anxiety, on the other hand, is your response to an uncertain future or diffuse threat.
Ah. So if you've ever laid awake at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, dreading an ambiguous email you have to send your boss the next morning, you've experienced anxiety.
Right. The threat isn't in the room. The threat is entirely in the anticipation of what might happen.
That makes total sense.
And because anxiety deals with the future, a certain amount of it is fundamentally necessary for survival and motivation. This pushes back against the cultural misconception that all anxiety is bad and must be eliminated.
Right. We've actually known this isn't true since 1908, thanks to foundational research known as the Yerkes-Dodson law.
Yes, the classic inverted U.
Researchers were studying mice, attempting to navigate mazes and learn to distinguish different levels of brightness. They carefully mapped out what happened to the mice's performance under different levels of arousal and stress, creating what is now famous as the inverted U curve.
And the findings were remarkably clear. At very low levels of arousal, performance is incredibly poor. You're sluggish, you're not motivated, you just don't care about the outcome.
Right.
On the other extreme, very high arousal, Also destroys performance because you're too panicked to think straight or execute fine motor skills.
So where is the sweet spot?
The peak of human and animal performance exists right in the middle. Moderate arousal actually sharpens focus, speeds up reaction time, and improves memory recall.
I always think of the Yerkes-Dodson law like tuning a guitar string.
Oh, that's good.
If the string is completely loose, you get no sound, no music, no energy. But if you frantically wind it too tight, the tension becomes too much and the string snaps. You need a very specific, regulated amount of tension to actually play the instrument well. So the goal of mental health isn't to eradicate anxiety and live at a zero-tension baseline. The goal is to regulate the tension into that functional middle zone.
And a brilliant practical application of this concept came in a 2014 study from Harvard researcher Alison Wood Brooks.
Oh, the karaoke study. I love this one.
It's so clever. She looked at how people handled intense pre-performance anxiety, specifically before doing public speaking or singing karaoke in front of strangers.
Which is a completely universal nightmare scenario for most of the population.
Truly, exactly the kind of situation that spikes cortisol.
Mhm.
So, Brooks divided the participants. She instructed one group to use traditional advice and try to calm themselves down before performing.
Like, take deep breaths, relax.
Right. But she instructed another group to verbally relabel their anxiety by simply saying out loud, "I am excited."
Just literally saying, I am excited.
Yes. And the results were staggering. The group that reframed their state as excited performed measurably better. They sang more accurately, they spoke more persuasively than the group desperately trying to calm down.
That is wild.
Mm,
But the mechanics of why that works connect back to everything we've discussed today about the biological hardware.
exactly.
Physiologically, anxiety and excitement are nearly identical states. Both involve a spiked heart rate, massive adrenaline release, sweating, and heightened alertness. Your body literally doesn't know the difference.
The hardware is running the exact same high arousal program. Brooks demonstrated that trying to suppress that massive biological wave of arousal and force yourself back to a resting state is incredibly difficult.
Right, it usually just creates more anxiety because you feel like you're failing to calm down. It's
Yeah.
like a car engine. The engine is already revving at 5,000 RPMs. You can't just slam on the brakes, you'll ruin the transmission. But you can shift gears. Reframing the arousal as excitement is just a cognitive gear shift. It directs the existing energy toward the performance rather than fighting the engine.
Realizing that we shouldn't aim to eliminate anxiety but rather to channel it fundamentally changes how we view public health today. And we really have to look at this on a macro scale.
How big is the issue?
According to the World Health Organization in 2019, anxiety disorders affected roughly 301 million people globally. It is the most common class of mental disorder in the entire world.
And in the United States, data shows roughly 31% of adults will experience an anxiety disorder at some point in their lifetime. This is not a niche issue.
Not at all.
It touches every single layer of society for you and everyone you know. It drives corporate workplace mental health policies. It is at the absolute center of the intense ongoing debates over adolescent screen time and social media algorithms.
It even dictates how we understand long-term physical health and aging, specifically through the concept of allostatic load, a term coined by neuroendocrinologist Bruce McEwen.
What is allostatic load exactly?
It's the cumulative biological cost of having this warning system stuck in the on position for years at a time. Just like Hanselized rats, chronically elevated stress hormones cause real, measurable wear and tear on the human cardiovascular and immune systems.
So understanding the mechanics of anxiety isn't just clinical trivia for medical students, it is essential life literacy.
Absolutely.
Whether you are managing your own mind, raising a high reactive child, or leading a team at work, you have to understand that anxiety is fear's forward-looking cousin. It is a highly adaptable, constantly revisable model that human beings are still actively figuring out.
It truly is Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom,
Yeah.
wired directly into our biological hardware.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We know from modern cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically what psychiatrist Aaron Beck identified as cognitive distortions, that our own thinking patterns, our catastrophizing, can sustain and feed our anxiety loops. And we know from the karaoke study that our bodies physically cannot tell the difference between a panic alarm and an excitement rush.
True.
So if the hardware just provides the energy and your mind provides the context,
Yeah.
how much power do you actually have to rewrite the programming of your own internal alarm system simply by changing the story you tell yourself about the siren?